one of the things that people make, the mistakes they make, is conflating this idea that a 3D model is a digital twin. From my perspective, that is not true. The digital twin, at its very core definition, is the connection between digital and physical, and in a lot of cases, that's identified by.
Welcome to a new episode of XR and AI Spotlight, the show where we give the stage to the founders and makers pushing the boundaries of XR and AI. My name is Gabriele Romagnoli, I'm your host, and I'm here today with Alex Karim. Alex is a technology leader focusing on the convergence of the physical and digital world. As a mixed reality pioneer, Alex was the first person to deploy HoloLens 2 in Formula 1 at McLaren. In 2021, Alex joined Microsoft, and in his current role, he consults some of the world's largest organizations, supporting their AI transformation. Today, we will learn from him what are the biggest barriers for the adoption of XR and AI in big organizations.
Well, I'd say some of the biggest barriers to adoption are actually not necessarily the technology, but rather the
how to capture the value from early POC and pilots.
Yeah, so I think this is really critical, to be honest, because that's what we're really talking about with ROI, right? You're either reducing cost or you're increasing profitability. There's two types of ROI as far as I'm concerned.
And the framework and guidelines that Microsoft uses to deploy AI responsibly.
It's something that Microsoft has been working on for a long time. We have a framework that we use to make our models as safe and responsible as they can be. But this is the same principles that then the customer needs to apply in the use case and in the way that it's actually architected and delivered. Because the responsibility isn't just at the model layer. There's loads of different layers.
But before we get into it, I wanted to thank our sponsor Meshy, who made this episode possible. Meshy is a real powerhouse for generating 3D assets with AI. You can start with a simple text or image prompt and get high-quality, stylized model in just a minute. One feature that I personally love is the ability to create stylized textures for any mesh, with or without UV, and since the release of Meshing 2.5, pro users can even edit only section of the generated textures with just a text prompt. Try it out, go to meshy.ai, start the 7 days trial, and after that, use the code XRAI20 to get 20% off your subscription. And now, let's roll the title and welcome Alex under the spotlight. So, Alex, it is really a pleasure to have you here with us.
No, I really appreciate it. And I know we've been talking in the background about doing something for a while, so it's really great to finally be here.
Absolutely. Here we are. And I want to start with the origin in a way, right? So while doing some research, I've seen indeed that you have been really at the forefront of deploying HoloLens 2 on the field in industry like indeed Formula 1. Yeah. I was wondering, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced when in really getting this organization to adopt this technology?
I mean, where do you start? I mean, when people think, oh, you worked at McLaren, that's a pioneering for Formula 1 team and everything like that, and that's absolutely true. But the idea that suddenly deploying innovative technology is super easy is not the case. And I think when I was there, I have to say that it was fairly early in my kind of technology career. And so there was a lot of things that I did right, some things I did wrong. What I'd say some of the biggest barriers to adoption are actually not necessarily the technology, but rather the human factors, right? When you're deploying technology like that, getting the frontline worker to actually use the technology and feel like they can actually get the value out of it is really kind of quite important. So, biggest challenges, I would say, user adoption. When you're bringing this in, say, the automotive side, and you've got the technicians that are using the technology, they need to buy into that. They need to actually get the headset on. They need to understand that the value that that's actually providing, that that's actually a supporting technology. A variety of different things. One of the biggest challenges actually as well that I actually personally had was people actually thinking that this is actually adding value and it's not just a cool piece of tech. With AR, VR, one of the biggest challenges you have is that the gaming side of things is so prevalent that people think that that is then a toy or a gaming technology. When you're deploying it in an enterprise setting, there's a lot of understanding and bringing people on the journey that needs to happen to actually make that work.
And even though you mentioned two important things that are somehow, I wouldn't say conflicting, but are the two sides that needs to be on board. One is the user that need to indeed show and adopt this. So be able to communicate effectively this value to what is then the other side, and that is the budget holder, right? The people that are going to make this decision. So maybe you can try to tell us and break these two apart, right? So when it's about with users, with people adopting it first, what is that helped in letting them adopt, test? Because this is a journey, right? It starts with first they wear it and understand what it is, then goes with a proof of concepts, then maybe start with a short pilot, then right, it is really a journey. So
it's a journey. It's 100% a journey. And I was going to say, really, like, one of the biggest things is the humor factor, is that don't make this a surprise. Don't make this a head office technology that there's then thrust upon the frontline worker or the field engineer that has to use that, or whatever role or persona that is. Bring them on the journey early on. Bring them into the early stage kind of design sessions. What is this technology supposed to do? What's the value we're trying to get out of that? Bring them on the journey all the way through. And I think that's really important, because I think with a lot of these deployments, head office has an objective that they want to meet, but actually then when it actually ends up at the end user, some of the decisions that were made earlier on aren't actually benefiting them. And therefore then that's when you have this conflicting situation where people don't agree with the technology, then don't want it to work. They're actually negatively affecting it. They don't want it to work. So they'll say, I couldn't log in, this couldn't work. And you have those kind of human factors. But it's all about, change management, really. At the end of the day, is like bringing the people on the journey that are actually going to use it. And then I guess on the other point, when it comes to the buy-in, the budget holders and stuff like that, that's that concept that this is a toy, this is not actually adding value. And then you get into that kind of ROI use case and stuff like that.
I do, exactly. So I want to talk about ROI because, of course, it's always the biggest, let's say, recurrent topic that is brought up. One thing I want to understand is from you, we always have this person in the buying committee, right? This person that is maybe the end user, that is not the technology guy. He's like, look, no, I just like the way I do it, and indeed affect negatively, right? Not even assessing this fairly, but just out of his own preconception.
Of course.
Is there something that you have found, like maybe a story or that helped in converting these individuals that sometimes they have good reason for being skeptical, right? Is there something though that you have found that maybe worked, a story, an anecdote, or that helped you?
I don't know about a story or an anecdote. What I found that, similar to what you were saying before, was that getting people hands-on with the technology, I think you just cannot replace that. There's no amount of PowerPoint, there's no amount of discussion, there's no amount of anything that can replace actually trying and getting hands-on with the technology. For the end user specifically, they need to see the value and they need to believe the value. Now, to your point, some people don't want it to work, because they're being difficult and that they specifically think that this is not going to add value. When you start talking in their language and start saying, hey, actually, by using this technology, for example, in the McLaren use case, it was connecting engineers to the frontline workers. It was like, actually, if you've got an issue, what's your process now? Well, you've got to go to your computer, you've got to log a ticket, you've got to do this. That's a painful process. Well, actually, if you use this technology, you can connect directly to the person you want to talk to, and they can see what you see and then support and solve the problem. Right. So you need to start talking in their language in terms of what are the pain points that they specifically are encountering, how is this technology going to use it, and then ultimately get them hands-on with it, show them the ease of how it's going to work, and then take their feedback. This is a really critical point. You need to be in that mode when you're bringing it to them, very much in a listening mode, identifying the pain points that they're immediately spotting and trying to bring that into your project so that you make sure that this is, they're listened to, their use case and their problems are solved, and then you're able to bring them on that journey.
Yeah. So getting their shoes, feeling their pain, understanding, talk their language, those are really the key things that helps you also position you as someone that is there to help, not just to sell them something. I think
you need to be their trusted help and their trusted partner. And this is an internal thing, so for example, when I was at McLaren, I sat in IT. So IT is outside of the business. So I was always like, the business was like my customer internally to a certain degree. Like, I'm there to help them. But then you could also apply that from an external perspective. If you're the vendor, bringing something to the customer, then you need to be adding the value. You're there to solve a problem. That is the end of it. And so you bring them on that journey to help them fix whatever's the pain point that they're trying to solve.
We touch on ROI, right? And that is always the user is on board, but then there is the budget that needs to be approved, and there is indeed this buying committee that's big. The budget is not necessarily with the decision maker, all complex, right? But having a good ROI statement, having a good business case for this is crucial. What are, let's say, something that you have seen that work when converting the value that immersive tech, either mixed reality or virtual reality, were you able to convert this usage into something that is tangible for then the upper management, for example?
Yeah, so I think this is really critical, to be honest. And this is not just an AR, VR problem. This is just like a sales problem. It's also, an innovation technology problem. Right. How do you showcase how this technology, your technology that you're working with, actually adds value and potentially reduces cost or increases profit? Because that's what we're really talking about with ROI, right? You're either reducing cost or you're increasing profitability. There's two types of ROI as far as I'm concerned. There's soft ROI and there's hard ROI. Soft ROI being, this makes us more efficient, we can save time here and there, we can do this and stuff like that. That on its own, to me, is good in terms of showcasing that stuff, but you need to get to hard ROI. What are we actually net, either reducing costs or increasing profitability using this technology? That is where you need to be. And I think sometimes people say, well, this saves us this amount of hours, and those amount of hours equate to, this amount of cost. And it's like, well, sure, but you're not going to, get rid of that person, so that money isn't going anywhere. You're still paying that salary. It's just they're then going to reallocate that time. What are they reallocating that time to? Does that make more money? Does it reduce cost? These are the sorts of things. So you need to get to the hard ROI rather than these soft metrics, which ultimately, look great on paper, but from a business perspective, a business holder, they're just saying, well, I'm just having a net spend with you to save some time, but I'm not saving any money anywhere. That's where you need to get to.
Tough, because sometimes it's not always, you cannot always do this one-on-one conversion.
And it's not all black and white, right? There's lots of different shades of gray. It's very hard to explain, you need to find specific tasks somewhere that are happening, or sometimes it's to do with investment. We see this quite a lot, where it's like, well, we're going to replace this physical piece of kit or this software and stuff like that with this physical item. We have a renewal coming up that's going to cost us X. These are the types of ROIs, because you're saying, well, we're not going to spend money on this because we're going to replace that entire process with maybe a virtual item or something virtual. So those are the key things that you need to try and kind of target. It is difficult. I'm not going to lie to you, Gabriele. It's a real difficult thing to navigate, but that's the real way to making ROI and getting the business cases and getting the budget to get that signed off.
So during your career, I imagine you followed several of these project implementations and adopting organizations indeed that are adopting this technology. I was curious if you have seen some specific application that have stuck around that scaled also within the organization, because those are also the one that show the biggest value, the one that scales. Are there some examples? Yeah,
100%. I mean, the obvious one where we start talking about AR and VR is training scenarios, right? I mean, I know your audience, Gabriele, is pretty AR VR focused, and so the groundbreaking idea that training is a great use case is probably, I know, exactly, mind blown. But to be honest, it still remains to be one of the top kind of VR specific use cases that really scales. The reality is that training has to happen, and this goes back to that ROI kind of conversation. People are flying people to physical locations to conduct training, to do X, Y, and Z. That has a cost, a fixed cost, hotels, travel, etc. If you're able to do that fully virtually, you're net reducing cost in that sense, but then you're able to, replace that with a kind of virtual system. That is a fantastic use case for a variety of use cases. And it's also cross industry. That's what's great about training, is that there's training in automotive and manufacturing. In the same way, there's training in finance and various other kind of
healthcare. You can name it. Exactly.
Every use case there needs to be training, right? That's one of the key things. So, I don't want to delve into that one too deeply, because I know obviously there's it's a well-trodden path, right? From a McLaren perspective, so talking from my own personal experience of doing that, there were a variety of use cases that we used. One of the things that we had a challenge with, we had almost too many use cases coming in, and a lot of the time we were kind of trying to qualify the ones that we felt were going to add value. Now, the obvious one that we deployed, was that remote support use case, connecting field engineers and experts. We found that had a great way to scale, because you could actually use that to continue operations regardless of the kind of situation, and again, reduce cost on travel and flying people around, so you're able to kind of reduce stuff there. In terms of the AR VR stuff, I mean, those are two that have been well trodden and actually pretty established. Others scale individually depending on the industry and depending on the use case. In engineering, VR for collaboration, stuff like Shapes XR, that kind of 3D, bringing content into an experience and sharing on that scales, but in specific use cases and specific industries, right? So anywhere that's using 3D content, I would say collaboration is probably quite a key one. And I'm sure, Gabriele, you've encountered that quite a lot, I imagine.
Yeah, and I wanted to go into that 3D or design review kind of trail, right? Because there is, especially also at Microsoft, has been always pushing and using their in their communication the word digital twin, right?
Sure.
And everybody has different impression of what a digital twin is, right? It is. And look, I don't want to discuss about what a digital twin is. I would like to hear from you what is not. What, in your opinion, is not a digital twin?
What is not a digital twin? So this is a really interesting, and a lot of people, like you said, have very different opinions on this. And there's no one definition. It's the same with AR, VR, XR, spatial computing, metaverse. Everyone's got their own kind of viewpoint on what that actually means. So what is not a digital? This reminds me actually of a conversation that I had with a friend of mine, Greg Demchak from Bentley Systems. We did a keynote together, and we discussed this concept of the digital twin, of what actually it is at a foundational level. Because I think one of the things that people make, or the mistakes they make, is conflating this idea that a 3D model is a digital twin. Now, from my perspective, that is not true. A digital twin has to be in some way connected to some sort of physical item. So then when you start peeling back the layers, you realize that the 3D adds value, but isn't the critical point that really changes the game and actually defines a digital twin. The digital twin, at its very core definition, is the connection between digital and physical, and in a lot of cases that's identified by data. So Greg's use case that he kind of discussed on stage, which I actually think is a really good one, is stuff like Uber or Deliveroo or something like that. That is a digital twin of a specific thing that's happening. You've ordered something online, you're getting live telemetry of where that item is, and then it arrives to you. That's a live connection between a digital and a physical connection. That is a digital twin. Now, you can layer on top of that 3D models, but to me, the data is the key when it comes to that kind of digital twin.
Yeah, and I think these already, it's already I agree with you 100%. Because if we just think about a digital twin is just a 3D representation of something, then I think we are making the digital twin too irrelevant.
Yeah.
It is a replica, it is a digital model, but it's not necessarily something that is a twin that is digital of something. There has to be more to it. And I think that, rightly so, a data layer of information is key.
Yeah, 100%. And then, because the digital twin has to mean something as well. The reality is if 3D models become what are considered digital twins, where does that end? Everything's a digital twin, really, in this kind of spatial world. We're in a Shapes XR session. We bring in a piece of, a 3D model of something. Oh, it was a digital twin. Well, no, it's a 3D model. It's useful, but it's not connected to the real thing. And I think the gray area, I would say, is when you start going to world scale stuff. So there's obviously platforms like Cesium and Black Shark AI, when they create a digital version of Barcelona or of New York City or something like that, and that's a 3D replica of a large scale item. And the term is commonly used in that case of digital twin, and that's a bit of a gray area because it's not physically connected to the real world? I'd still say it's not. When you start layering, population data, power consumption, all that over that, then I think we start getting into that digital.
Look, and my intent was not really to get into the definition of it, right? And I think it's a good point, but other to actually touch on one important thing, that is data, right? Because the other point is that company and organization have a lot of data, more they can ever manage or even understand, a lot of which is on legacy system. I mean, let's be honest. Sometimes organization, the biggest one, I work at Johnson & Johnson, and sometimes it was hard to get a SharePoint to work, right? As simple as having a share file on the cloud. So how do you manage that side of things? How do you manage organizations that are dealing with legacy system that want to digitize and create digital twin, or then something we're going to discuss later, use these data to build, for example, AI models?
Do you know what? It's a fantastic question, Gabriele. And here's the reality. Everyone's lives would be so much easier if everything was greenfield. We were net new. We were building technology from the ground up. The reality of the world is that is just not the case. Companies have been investing in technology for decades, and these large multinational organizations, out of a requirement to deliver technology and deliver solutions to their clients, have had to deploy a variety of systems. Some of the companies that I've worked for in the past had 5 or 6 CRM systems, managing all their customers, because they had different departments doing that. That doesn't make any sense, right? They had like systems on premise here, then stuff like that. And, a lot of the customers that we work with, it's a similar kind of story. The question is, what can you do about it? The reality of, if we talk about that AI specific use case, which you kind of alluded to, is, companies are coming to, companies like Microsoft, and they say, hey, we really want to use AI. We know it's very important and stuff like that. How do we kind of get started with that? And there's off-the-shelf stuff that they can get hands-on with that doesn't need much customization, and it's easy. A lot of companies are adding AI features into their existing platforms, and that makes, things a lot easier. Obviously, from a Microsoft perspective, that's stuff like Copilot. But when we start thinking, okay, well, we want to layer AI onto our line of business applications, into our internal systems, this is where the complexity starts, because we need to start using that LLM over data that might be stuck on premises, or might be in a different cloud vendor, or it could be anywhere. And then that starts having that conversation. The reality is you need to deliver good foundations. And that doesn't mean wiping out internal, like complete, redesigns of architectures, but it does mean bringing data into a platform where, stuff can connect to it. So whether that's, these hybrid cloud kind of technologies where you're able to bring on-premises data into cloud environments so that they at least can be surfaced, then you can connect things together. There's loads of things that you can do where you can modernize things without completely ripping and replacing and redoing architectures. I think the reality is you need to focus on the foundations, but what can help accelerate that re-architecture and that redelivery of some of these systems is these Halo projects. So, for example, when I was at McLaren, when we were deploying HoloLens, you have to manage HoloLens with a cloud-focused MDM solution, mobile device management. So stuff like Azure Intune. Azure Intune is somewhere where you can manage devices, mobile phones, laptops. You can push policies, things to that. We didn't have that at the time. But by having this Halo project, we said, well, we need that for this. So we're going to actually take that step to modernize and move to that platform. And that is really important. You use these Halo projects to bring the foundational layer up. That kind of that water that raises all boats. So I think that there's two things: focus on the foundations, but those Halo projects will help you kind of get there. Because especially when it comes to AI, data is everything. And if the AI models, the LLMs can't touch it, you're not getting anywhere, right?
I just wanted to have a quick break to remind you that the recording of these episodes and many more great conversation with incredible experts are available on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Just head over to my profile or in the episode description below and pick the platform you prefer. And now let's get back to the show. So maybe I want to take a step back and if you could, let's say, guide us through some examples of how You and Microsoft have in the past guided companies, organization through understanding, experimenting, and adopting. Because as we said, as any new technology, it is a journey, right? It is a journey of starting with understanding what it is, doing some initial testing, and then adopting it. Can you give us some example and to show us maybe some successes?
I mean, Microsoft as a global organization, if I think about my role there and all the stuff that we've been through, that, I mean, there's literally countless kind of use cases and scenarios. If I think about the XR space, which I know is kind of one of the key things, all the stories that we've worked on in the past, I mean, obviously there's the use case that I mentioned with McLaren. That has been done many, many times with the likes of Porsche, Mercedes-Benz, and all the other kind of auto manufacturers. I think the reality is that, we at Microsoft have a variety of ways that people can interact with us. We have technology centers, we have executive briefings. Typically, it starts there. We start having a conversation about technology transformation. That's the reality. You need to have that conversation at the board level, at the C level. That then transitions into a conversation about, okay, we have a strategy from a top level. What are the specific use cases within that organization that we're going to go after? And if, for example, that was spatial or was, kind of AR, VR technology, which departments and which specific use cases we're going to go after? And we pick 2 or 3 of those, and then we'll go after those in detail. From a specific one, the Mercedes-Benz one obviously has been well told. Same with, a Porsche in terms of their dealership networks around the world, putting devices in dealerships and then connecting to engineers. Microsoft would be alongside that, but typically we also work alongside a partner network. So we have products, but we also have partners, the likes of DXC, Insight, many others in the kind of spatial space where they help customers to adopt the technology alongside Microsoft. But like I said, it typically starts with like an envisioning session, understanding the art of the possible, then going into a more focused session where we start saying, okay, what are the specific use cases that we want to do, architecting stuff like that, and then working with partners to actually deliver that and get that into kind of production. That's typically how a kind of customer journey really looks like, really.
And and this is, of course, it doesn't matter if it's AI and XR sounds like, right? It seems like. And now, based on your experience, how long does this take? Of course, it can change wildly, but can you give us a range?
And yeah, I mean, to your point, it really can vary wildly. But there have been deployments of rapid technology in 2 to 3 weeks, but at the same time, if it's a multi-year kind of transformation, that it's in the name, it can take time. But there's been, I think the Mercedes use case, I think was spun up in a few months. But in various others, it can take a significant amount of time longer. Right. It also depends that a lot of these large organizations will be talking to Microsoft for a long time, will have existing relationships, and things that might have been mentioned years in the past then come up later and then kind of spin up and focus in a
So when do you start counting?
Yeah, exactly. What is the point where the clock kind of starts? But I think really it's probably from the point that we start actually getting into the use cases, from use case identification to delivery. Right. Now, like I said, it's very hard to put a specific time frame on that, but it can be from as short as a couple of weeks all the way through to months, and then in some massive transformations, it can be multi-year.
Yeah. And you mentioned also as Copilot as being sometimes as a quick win.
Sure.
Right? Can you give us some examples of how that works right now? What are some of the let's say easy implementation that you have seen?
Oh yeah, 100%. So when it comes to AI, so we have this kind of viewpoint of there's buy off the shelf, there's extend, which is adding extensions to these kind of off the shelf solutions that provide connections, and then there's the full custom development, which is stuff like Azure OpenAI, building out your own kind of solutions. The quick wins 100% are in that kind of buy camp. And from a Microsoft perspective, Copilot is the AI feature or uplift that we extend to our kind of product set. So obvious one would be the Copilot for Microsoft 365. That's your standard one that people actually probably understand the most, that's adding that LLM layer into your existing product set. So how does that add value and how can you use it today? Well, if you have the license within your M365 environment, you can literally recap Teams meetings. And even just that on its own is a massive game changer. So what you do, you turn on your transcription in your meeting. The LLM is then able to reason over the words of that meeting. It doesn't need to be a full recording. It just needs the transcript, just needs the words. It can then assign all of the actions and all of the kind of next steps that have been discussed on the call. It also can then be used as a recap for other people that haven't joined the meeting. So if you missed the meeting, you can actually understand very quickly, recap me this meeting. Or if you join late, you can see everything that's happened before that. And then you can have interactions. Was my name mentioned in this meeting? Yes, it was. These were the things that were mentioned about what you need to do. Was, what were the actions that were assigned to me? What are and you can kind of have that kind of natural kind of conversation. And that's just one feature within the M365 stack. But it gives you a kind of example of, those are features that can be switched on and turned on and actually reasoned over quite quickly. And they're the kind of quick wins, as it were. But there's still a lot of work to do with user adoption, right? Because then you start getting into the conversation of like, well, we've got this turned on. How did the users use it? Do they know how to interact with an AI? Have they ever done much prompting in their kind of spare time? So it then becomes a different kind of conversation in that, it's easy to deploy a quick win in terms of technology, but they're actually getting the value out of it. You've got to work, to make sure that the users, back to, the first points that we were making, that user adoption is pretty key.
And if I also understood correctly how this works, then there is no extra data concern because everything happens in the same system. So
absolutely. You're absolutely right, Gabriele. And to be honest, this is one of the key questions that we get. So obviously my new role at Microsoft is, previously obviously leading the mixed reality business in the UK, now focus on kind of AI and specifically with customers. One of the key things that customers come to us and say, well, if I put my AI in this, my data is training that AI to become better, and then other companies can then talk to it and get my private information. I think that all comes from this stuff that you saw. I think I can't remember which company it was, but there were engineers that were uploading information, IP, and then that was training the model. What you provision within your and this is I'm talking from a Microsoft perspective, within your environment for Copilot stays within your trust boundary. So anything that you have within your environment has the same kind of protocols and safety that it would have, for any other feature. And then from an Azure perspective, there's this concept of Azure tenant or Azure tenancy. That's your kind of trust boundary, as it were, for an Azure perspective. And again, the LLM is provisioned in your environment as your own version of Azure OpenAI, for example, that then isn't trained in terms of improving the models and stuff like that. That's your instance of GPT 3.5 or GPT 4 or whatever you want to use. And these are one of the key questions when it comes to AI. One of the key questions is my data secure? And the other one is, how do we do this responsibly? And they're the key questions that any kind of conversation on AI is having right now. And so, it's funny, the customers are coming in and they're already bought into the idea of AI. So there's no your real kind of envisioning in a lot of cases that's needed. It's more like, how do we do this in the right way, responsibly, in a way that protects our data and stuff like that? And that's the kind of a lot of the conversations that we're.
So I think that the security, in a way, answer is pretty easy, as you said. What's your answer when they ask, how can we do it responsibly?
It's a really good question, Gabriele. And to be honest, it's something that Microsoft, from our perspective, have been working on for a long time. So the Microsoft responsible AI journey kind of goes back all the way to 2016 in terms of all the kind of AI principles. Ultimately, we have a framework that we use to make our models as safe and responsible as they can be. But this is the same principles that then the customer needs to apply in the use case in the way that it's actually architected and delivered. Because the responsibility isn't just at the model layer. There's loads of different layers. So for example, if we go back to the model layer, people like OpenAI that are building these kind of amazing large language model, right? They will bake in safety into that, right? So if you ask GPT 3.5 or GPT 4, can you make me a weapon or something like that? Tell me how to do that. It just simply won't reply because there's safety built into the model. However, we go further than that in terms of adding like potential layers. So there's, from an Azure perspective, if you deploy Azure OpenAI service, we have these kind of safety systems and toggles. So you can say, how much hateful information do I want to allow? And how much, sexual content do I want to allow and stuff like that, and almost like sliders. And you think, well, actually, from an enterprise perspective, you're always going to say none of that. But actually, if it's in a healthcare scenario, you don't want to block all of the some of these things because actually then it won't be as useful to you. So we give that kind of customization, but then you start getting into the other layers, which are in the application, in the way it's deployed, and the data it has access to. They're customer considerations that they need to work to. And so we have this framework. There's 6 principles. Probably not going to go through all of them, but one of them is transparency. And I think that's a really key one. And that's providing context to where that answer came from. There was that whole discussion about hallucination when it came to AI. Everyone was saying, well, can I trust this answer? What you'll notice more recently in these AI models is that they will provide references. And that is a really useful thing because it gives you trusted sources of information. What's actually happening there? Retrieval augmented generation. If you ask an LLM, who is the Prime Minister of the UK, if you asked GPT 3.5 that, an offline GPT 3.5, it will give you the wrong answer because the data it has was based on a certain period of time. What we have now is this retrieval augmented generation, this grounding. And you're saying to the LLM, okay, don't just trust all of the knowledge that you've been trained on. Go out to the internet, pull some information, bring that in, and then provide the answer and reference it. So these are the kind of things that you need to think about when you're building your kind of applications, because provide your LLM a trusted piece of information. That might be a SQL database full of your information. It could be a knowledge article. It could be public information. That needs to be your trusted piece of information. So, that's just an example of transparency in action, because the LLM alone may get things wrong if you're not providing it the answer, because that LLM was trained at a moment in time. That is the information it has access to. So.
Fascinating. And I think maybe I should, if I find that principle, I think we should put them in the show notes because then people can absolutely.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, no, we have like a full report that comes out, fairly regularly. I think there was one that came out not too long ago. I'll give you the information, Gabriele, and we'll in the show.
So
notes.
You will find it in the description below. Absolutely. I was wondering if there was any specific example of AI and XR that you have seen combining and merging in meaningful way, because being the show XR AI Spotlight, that's an area that I truly believe can complement each other in powerful way. Have you seen some examples?
Yeah, I've seen a lot actually recently. I think part of that cynically is you think every VC and every investor is saying, well, we need AI in this, and the CEO is coming down and saying we need AI, and they're throwing AI at everything because they feel that they have to. So cynically, I think that we're going to see that regardless because people think that it's important. In terms of what I think actually is adding value, is these AI agents within experiences, XR experiences. There's a couple that I can name that I think do this pretty well. So there's a company called Virtual Speech. I don't know if you know them, Gabriele, but they have an experience which is a VR platform that's built for Quest, and it's training you on human interaction, and it's really, really good. I tried it recently, and it put me in an experience. So it said, okay, you're the manager, and this person that's sitting across the table from you is your employee, and they haven't been turning up to work on time. They haven't been doing their work to the standard. When they're at home and working at home, they don't reply to your messages, and you're having a sit-down meeting with them. And then suddenly I'm in this experience, and I'm like, oh my God, like this is feeling really immersive. And I'm sat in a meeting room. This person's across the room from me. And there's something to be said about that XR side. You're fully immersed in this environment. You really feel it feels real. But that person on the other side of the table is powered by AI. there's an LLM that's providing the kind of context and the information, and they would have trained it based on this scenario. So then I'm asking this AI, saying, oh, well, actually, you haven't been turning up to work more recently, and, I'm just, what's going on and stuff like that. And then as the conversation, progressed, I realized that, oh my God, there's something going on in their personal life. There's a reason for this sudden change in information. And then I was like, okay, wow, I've been learning. And, when I took the headset off, I was like, I approached that wrong. My first question should have been, are you okay? Is everything okay? I just feel there's something off. Like, I just want to check in on you. And I actually took something away from that experience. And I was like, hey, if I was in that situation, if that's a person that, has always been trustworthy, has always done, what they needed to do, then recently has changed and exhibited a different change of behavior, likelihood is there's something going on and you need to help them and work with them. And so, like, I actually learned something from that, from an XR and AI experience. And I was like, that is game changing. And so they obviously work with lots of corporates and stuff like that. But I think that is a massive use case for this tech.
Yeah, I totally think that indeed agents or let's say having some avatars or counterparts being represented in an immersive environment in VR, I think is extremely powerful, and especially with the recent upgrades to GPT-4o. And we've seen this voice that is lifelike and it responds at the speed that is really hard with a tone, with an intonation.
Yeah,
it's going to be very hard to start.
No, you're right, and there's an integration with the OpenAI with a robot. I don't know if you've seen that video. I'm trying to remember what the name of the robot is, but it was unbelievable. And the thing that was unbelievable was it's like the intonation, and it was. I think at the end of the demo they say, "Hey, robot, I forget the name. How do you think you did?" And the robot replied, "Yeah, I think I did pretty well." And I was like, "What?" Like, a robot in my eyes should say, yes, I think I did that well. But it was like, I think I did a good job of that. And that is just nuts in terms of like the immersion, right?
And what I wonder is, should we keep that or not?
Good question. Because, do you want your AI to sound uncannily human, or do you want there to be a clear, it's a really good question, Gabriel. And the answer is, I don't know. I think we are going to encounter that, and we're going to have to, as a human race, decide how we want that to work.
Yes, and not like in 10 years, 15 years. I think next year, because at the pace at which indeed these models now talk and respond to us, I think this is really the time frame that we start considering.
I mean, the AI world is moving at an insane pace right now, and like. The innovation is fantastic, but it's also opening loads of kind of conversations around this, around like, there was obviously the OpenAI stuff with Scarlett Johansson and that voice and stuff like that, ownership of IP, that's another big whole kind of bag of worms that, as this technology innovates, what does it mean for all of this sort of stuff? So, there's loads to kind of unpack there, but, like you said, these are conversations and realities that we're going to have to deal with, not in 5-10 years, like you said, in the next coming months and years.
Yeah. And by the way, Alex, sorry, allow me also to bring up some of the guests that were here before, because Bring, for example, I don't know if you've ever tried Bring Traveler. They also have added an AI agent in their app. So you can travel and have actually a Walkman that you can bring to your face and just ask them questions regarding the location that you're visiting. So that is very good. Like, there is also Keiichi Matsuda, who made Meet Wall, is a web AR experience. You get this owl that tells you about the forest. So there are many examples that indeed merge AI and XR. And if you are interested, go back, check out the episodes, because
I 100% will, Gabriel. And you know what? We're getting closer to that science fiction future. Holograms of AIs, talking to us and providing us information, and no longer, science fiction. It's becoming reality. The technology is there.
Absolutely. So I would like to, we haven't touched hardware in any way, but I still wanted an opinion on that before we kind of like start closing. That is, you as one that brought HoloLens on shop floors, right? So you have seen, and I imagine you manage or dealt with many other devices, be it, for example, HTC, Meta, Apple, Google, right? Siemens, and so on. So what do you think is going to be the go-to platform for enterprises?
Where do you start? I think the reality is it's going to be use case by use case specific. from a VR perspective, Meta is doing a ton in this space and investing significantly. Now, Meta is obviously very much a consumer-facing company in a lot of ways. That's where they cut their teeth in stuff like Facebook, Instagram, even Oculus, and now Meta Quest platform. Obviously, consumer was the real key. Now they're investing significantly in the mobile device management, the enterprise kind of wrapper on that. So I think they're going to be a big player. Cost comes into that, right? And so, when it comes to a VR space, I expect to see Picos, I expect to see HTCs, I expect to see Meta Quests in enterprises. I think that the reality is capability and cost. That's what a company typically looks at. I'd love to connect with someone on the Apple side to see what their kind of B2B vision is. And same with the kind of Samsung stuff, because the challenge with stuff that's cost $3,500, and by the way, obviously I know that because that's the kind of range of cost that HoloLens really sits in. It's a different scenario, it's a different use case. As a business, if something is delivering the value at $500, that is a massive, obvious decision, right? But then even in the VR space with the Meta stuff, Quest 3 obviously has all the mixed reality pass-through and stuff like that. But if you really didn't even need that, you may be able to go to a cheaper device because that provides you what you need. So, the reality is it depends on the use case. It also depends on the business, the budget you have. Because when you're building a use case and a business case, your budget can't just be for the hardware. It has to also be for the software and for the integration and, all this sort of stuff. So, there's loads of factors that go into a kind of a use case. But, look, I think stuff like HTC, I think MetaQuest, I think, Pico, I think they're already making amazing ground in the kind of enterprise space. The Google stuff, really interesting because obviously they've tied up with Samsung on the hardware. So, and I've seen a lot from Google recently in terms of them doing more with the kind of AR integrations into their stuff. So I think watch that space in that way. I'm interested to see what they're going to do. And yeah, we haven't even talked on the glasses side of things, but I think they're going to become more prevalent. I mean, Google's obviously the glass, wasn't as successful as they wanted, but they teased that kind of AI capability into a glasses form factor again at their recent kind of conference. So I think the glasses form factor is going to be a whole other game.
We'll see. Time will tell. I think that's the only thing we can say. Look, Alex, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I think that people have learned a lot. I was curious, is there anything else you are working on besides pushing Microsoft AI and XR into the
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, the reality is I'm a human, right? I'm a full-time employee of Microsoft, which takes up a lot of my time. But outside of work, I love having these kind of conversations, Gabriele, right? And I have my own opinions and my own things that I like to discuss, outside of work. Obviously in this conversation, it's been very Microsoft heavy. But the reality is that, I'm more than that. I've worked at various other different organizations and I love to tell that story and find stories from other people that I find, really interesting. So really glad to share this stage. I've just created my own podcast platform, XRAI is an amazing platform. And I've taken inspiration from you, Gabriele. I think it's really, really useful, honestly. And I'm saying that, genuinely, I have watched a few of the episodes and I really enjoyed them. And so I've been thinking, if I'm creating my own podcast platform, what do I want to do? So I've called it Masters of Innovation. Not specific to spatial or not specific to AI or technology, but rather more holistic. How do you innovate, in a consumer or a B2B setting? And, the first episode launched, about a month ago, all talking about volumetric capture, 3D virtual humans and stuff like that. So it's very spatial heavy. Episode 2 is all about culture. How do you set a culture within your company that actually drives innovation? Because that's a really key conversation that, culture isn't about technology. It really is about people, which we kind of alluded to in this conversation. And so, so I'm really excited to kind of share that, Gabriele, I'll share you the links. Hopefully we can put that in the show notes. But
Absolutely, we will.
Yeah,
absolutely, we will. So anybody that is interested, actually, I think it's good because it's not often about technology, and innovation happens due to different driver, and there is so much more. And being change management, one of the things that is really driving the rest, because without it, technology doesn't move forward. So absolutely, and as I'm pretty sure that looking forward to see many more of those episodes. Alex, thank you very much. I love the conversation. It was a pleasure to have you, and I'm pretty sure we might stumble on each other in the future.
I think we will, and I think maybe we'll see Gabriele on Masters of Innovation sometime soon.
Who knows? Who knows? Thank you very much, Alex.
See you soon.
Thank you very much for listening in. If you like the show, please leave a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or a thumbs up on YouTube. It really means a lot to me, and it's a great support for the show. Till next time.